Hey, what's going on everyone? In this video, we're doing a comparison of the Sony Xperia Z2 up against the HTC One M8. Now when it comes to the LED notification light, the one on the Z2 is much bigger, but the colors are a bit more faint and it doesn't pulse as much as it would want it to. While the notification light is smaller on the HTC M8, it provides brighter colors and it pulses at a higher frequency, so it's better on the HTC M8. When it comes to length, they're pretty much a tie, and when it comes to width of the device, the Xperia Z2 is just slightly wider by a few millimeters. But when it comes to thickness, the HTC M8 is slightly thicker by a few millimeters. When it comes to weight, there's only 3 grams of difference, so in terms of mobility and carrying it in your hand, they're pretty much a tie. The Z2 isn't exactly the most comfortable Sony device I've ever held. This is mainly because all the edges around the device are straight, there's no curves. And the advantage the HTC M8 has is basically that you have a lot of curves on the sides, and this makes it feel a lot more comfortable to hold, and it feels natural because it just arcs with your hand. One other thing to note is that the Z2 is made entirely of plastic, whereas the HTC M8, apart from the screen, 90% of it is covered in aluminum. And while Sony's known to make very attractive looking devices, the HTC M8 looks better, mostly because it's covered in metal, so it gives it a more polished, more impressive look. One advantage the Z2 does have though is that it's dust and water resistant, whereas the HTC M8 isn't. Now both devices have great looking 1080p screens, with their each rocking a resolution of 1080 by 1920. Now the Sony Xperia Z2 has a IPS LCD screen which is at 5.2 inches, whereas the HTC M8 has a Super LCD 3 screen at 5 inches. You're noticing that the HTC M8 is significantly brighter. Well, both devices actually set to the same brightness level, but the brightness output on the HTC M8 is far greater than what's displayed on the Z2. However, what I noticed about the Xperia Z2 is that thanks to Sony's patented technology, including triluminous display like found in their TVs, I'm getting more color punch, more emphasis on color pop on the Xperia Z2, whereas the HTC M8 has more realistic colors. It doesn't pop as much as the Z2, so in terms of screen display, both of them have an advantage over the other, so I'll leave it as a tie. On to the discussion of RAM, the Xperia Z2 is a clear winner since it has 3 gigs, whereas the HTC M8 only has 2 gigs. Both devices are packing a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 quad-core processor, and notice that the Xperia Z2 is very snappy, but it's not the fastest and most responsive device I've ever used. Nothing bad, but nothing spectacular either. Whereas the HTC M8 is far more responsive and quicker than the Xperia Z2. It's actually the fastest and most responsive smartphone device I've used to date. When it comes to GPU and general gaming performance though, I have to say that the processor is kicking into high gear because the responsiveness on the Xperia Z2 is fantastic. There's actually no lag, no frame rate droppage at all. It can actually compete and hold its own against the top devices, including the HTC M8. And with the HTC M8 running the same GPU as Xperia Z2, it's pretty much a given that the HTC M8 can hold its own. And this is actually gaming performance on the HTC M8 being demonstrated this time. It's actually the most fluid device I've used in terms of general responsiveness, but it's equal in terms of gaming performance as the Xperia Z2, which is a good thing because they're both fantastically smooth. Both devices have the usual connectivity like Bluetooth, GPS, Wi-Fi, which supports 802.11a, b, g, n, and AC. And of course, aside from the usual things, the Xperia Z2 has exclusive features such as connecting a DualShock 3 controller to the phone. But in regards to connectivity, the HTC M8 is better because it has an IR blaster built inside, which means you can use it as a remote control for your TV and other home theater devices. The Xperia Z2 does not have an IR blaster, and it's far more practical and far more widely accepted that people are going to want a remote control in their phone rather than connecting a DualShock 3 controller to their smartphone. On the back of the HTC M8 we have dual 4-megapixel cameras which are used to take special effect photos like DSLR background defocusing and 3D animation. And of course, if you want to see more demonstrations of the Xperia Z2's or HTC M8's camera, be sure to check out their individual video reviews and camera sample videos. You can find links to those videos in the video description below. Now moving over to the front of the HTC M8, you do have an astonishing 5-megapixel camera which works fantastic. Over on the Xperia Z2 at the rear we have a 20.7-megapixel camera, and over at the front we have a 2.2-megapixel camera. And what you're seeing now is some images captured with the Xperia Z2 at 20.7 megapixels and manual mode, and it allows for capturing of great huge pictures. And of course you have special effects like this which allow for artificial DSLR background defocusing. And of course these are images captured with the HTC M8 which aren't as good as the Sony's. This is because this megapixel count is smaller, the details aren't as crisp and clear, but the artificial look of the DSLR background defocus isn't as bad as the Z2. It looks a lot better on the HTC M8. Okay, so everything you're seeing and hearing is being captured with the Sony Xperia Z2. and it's being recorded at 1080p at 60 frames per second. And the reason I'm doing 4K recording is because the HTC M8 doesn't have 4K recording. So it's a given that the Xperia Z2 is much better at video recording anyway, but I just wanted to give you a 1080p comparison. So everything looks pretty decent. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to the HTC M8. And of course this is being captured with the HTC M8 at 1080p at 60 frames per second because, again, as I mentioned, it doesn't have 4K recording. Now these segments are rather short on purpose because if you want to see some sample pictures and videos taken with each camera in much more detail, I'll have links to those videos in the video description. And in those individual videos, you can download actual videos recorded with their respective cameras and play them in their full quality, unedited footage on your TV, computer monitor, or whatever. And of course for this segment, what you're seeing is the Xperia Z2 in low lighting situation. This time audio is being captured with my microphone and not through the phone, and it performs surprisingly well, actually very good. The only problem I notice is that it has trouble focusing at nighttime. It pulses in and out a lot. Moving over to the HTC M8, it performs decent in low lighting situations, not as good as Xperia Z2. Not only that, because the video isn't as clear and sharp as the Xperia Z2, it doesn't look as great in low lighting situation as well. Images look a bit soft, colors are a bit off. So the Xperia Z2 overall as a camera just performs generally better. Okay, so it's really bright, nice warm summer day, actually quite hot, but nice nonetheless. And this is the front-facing camera of the Sony Xperia Z2. Now what I noticed with the Z2, and it's quite common with most smartphones, is that if there's a little bit of light lost in the picture, you tend to get a bit of noise in the image. Nothing that will ruin the footage because it's rather sharp and clear, but I do notice it there, so it's kind of like your typical average front-facing camera. And of course this is the HTC M8, and I am noticing that because this is the brightest I've recorded with this front-facing camera, it's a bit too white. Looks kind of cloudy type of thing. But generally in low lighting conditions the HTC M8 performs much better. It's a much higher megapixel count on the front-facing camera of the HTC M8, so it's pretty much expected. So the HTC M8 has the better front-facing camera, but the Z2 has a better rear camera. On the subject of cameras, looking at the camera app of the Xperia Z2, has some special and unique features like this, which is AR mode, which allows for virtual reality creatures like dinosaurs and fish to pop up, depending on what you choose of course. You also have time shift video, which allows for slow motion effects, and a few other features that are pretty nifty and cool. Of course, the problem here is that if you're using the camera and you use superior auto mode, which is a simple auto mode function, you cannot take pictures in 20.7 megapixels in auto mode. It caps at 8 megapixels. The only way you can take pictures in 20.7 megapixels is through manual mode, which isn't actually mentioned anywhere, so it's rather confusing for new users to the Z2. Furthermore, if you plan to record 4K video at 3.5 to 4 minutes, the camera will overheat and shut down, and you can't use the camera for another 3 minutes because it needs to cool down. So be wary when using 4K recording. In fact, I suggest you never use 4K recording on the Xperia Z2. Now both smartphones have easy to use camera apps, but what you're seeing now is the HTC M8, and it's a lot easier to use than the Xperia Z2. You also have a lot more manual control available, and it has less exclusive features though, that's the trade-off, but you have some neat ones still available like dual capture, which uses the front and rear cameras at the same time, as you can see. So in terms of the camera apps, I'll give it a tie. Okay, so in this part of the video I'm going to be doing my usual speaker comparison test. And do keep in mind that this is my DSLR microphone, so you won't be able to pick up the sound as good as my ears. So basically what I've done is I'm playing the same video on both phones, which is the comparison of the Sony Xperia Z2 to the Samsung Galaxy S5. You can find a link to that video in the video description. I'm playing them from the exact same time spot. Both speakers are on max volume. Do keep in mind both phones have dual front-facing speakers. Yes, even the Xperia Z2 is not too well known of a fact, but it does have dual front-facing speakers. So let's see what kind of results we can get. To download files faster. Both devices are available with 16 gigs of internal storage, and in terms of external storage with a microSD card slot, you can reach a... Okay, and now for the HTC M8. Together to download files faster. Both devices are available with 16 gigs of internal storage, and in terms of external storage with a microSD. So what I'm noticing is that the Xperia Z2 is fairly loud for a smartphone, but the sound is very muffled compared to the HTC M8. The speakers on the HTC M8 are just wicked awesome. That's why it sounds so vastly superior. Both devices have great batteries, and starting with the HTC M8, it has a 2600 mAh battery, which from 100% down to 10% was able to last me about 2.5 days, with roughly 2.5 hours of on-screen time, which includes using the speakers, which drains more battery, and about 2.5 hours of talk time. That's pretty much what I average. But the Xperia Z2 has a much bigger, better battery at 3200 milliamps. It's able to last me 3 days from 100% down to 14% with 3 hours of talk time on the phone and 3 hours of screen usage, including using the speakers for YouTube and video watching. So the battery in the Z2 is much better. For storage, the Xperia Z2 only has 16 gigs of internal storage options available, but also has a micro SD card slot which supports up to expandable storage of 128 gigs. Whereas the HTC M8 comes in available options of 16 or 32 gigs of internal storage and includes a slot for a micro SD card slot for expandable storage up to 128 gigs. So the only winner here is if you buy the 32 gig version of the HTC M8 for storage. When it comes to the software interface of the Sony Xperia Z2, things are pretty simple here. Things are easy to use, easy to find, it's just a simple layout, which is a good thing. The only problem I have with the software is that, of course, that when you're receiving a notification ringtone or a ringtone from a phone call, is that both speakers do not output sound. Only the bottom speaker works for some bizarre reason, and this is a software issue that Sony is yet to address. The Z2 has a decent amount of exclusive features available. You have stuff like PlayStation Mobile, the Sony Entertainment Network, which you can download movies, albums, whatnot. And of course, you have other exclusive features like connecting to other Xperia devices, DualShock 3 controller connectivity. You can find a demonstration of much more software features in the video review of the Z2. Whereas the interface on the HTC M8 is very easy to use. In fact, when you turn on the device for the very first time, you get a lot of pop-ups everywhere in the phone telling you how to use certain functions. It's probably the most user-friendly phone available straight out of the box. Of course, when it comes to exclusive features on the M8, there aren't many. You have some nice ones like Blink Feed, which I use daily. I find it to be a superb app, but generally there aren't that many available. And this of course makes the interface of the HTC M8 better and easier to use, but in terms of exclusive features, there's a clear winner with the Z2. And when it comes to phone call quality, the HTC M8 is better than the Xperia Z2s. So it's time to break this comparison down to its final components. As a multimedia device, both of them have great screens, but because the speakers are better on the HTC M8, I would say it's better as a multimedia device. Now in terms of best bang for buck, which one's the better dollar value? Well, I would say they're pretty much a tie. The Xperia Z2 isn't widely available as the HTC M8, but if they are available somewhere in your area, they're generally about the same price. Now the following part is my personal opinion, because if I say something bad about HTC or something bad about Sony, people get mad for no reason. This is simply my personal opinion only. I would choose the HTC M8 as the winner. You see, it has better speakers, the software, the general interface is a lot faster and more responsive. I just feel that it's just a complete device out of the box. I know the cameras aren't great, but for important functions, I would always take my pocket camera or my DSLR because they provide much better picture and video quality, especially for zooming in because smartphones use digital zoom. I'm not saying that the Xperia Z2 is an awful device, it's just that it doesn't feel complete out of the box. You see, when you're receiving a phone call or a text notification, both speakers don't play sound, only the bottom speaker does. But when you're playing multimedia content like a video, both speakers work. It's bizarre. It's a software issue that Sony is yet to address. Then of course you have the 4K video recording overheating problem, which Sony never mentioned in advance. Camera will overheat, and you can't use the camera for another 2-3 minutes, you're just stuck waiting for it to cool down. But that's the reason I like the HTC M8, it just feels complete out of the box. So if you found this video comparison useful, be sure to check out their individual video reviews, camera sample videos, gaming demo videos, all that other good stuff in the video description. All those links will be there. And also, if you found this video useful, be sure to check my Facebook, Google+, Twitter links, also in the video description. Hit the like button, it does help. Subscribe, and thanks for watching.